many succumbing to their injuries after first responders removed them from the island. The volcanic alert level of the island remains at level 2. Alongside people across New Zealand, we observed a minute's silence at 2:11 p.m, including the entire Cabinet. Our thoughts continue to be with the families of those who have passed and with those who are injured. As I've said many times, there remain now questions to be asked and questions to be answered. As you'll know, on the 10th of December, WorkSafe opened a health and safety investigation into the harm and loss of life caused by the eruption. They will do this as the Workplace Health and Safety Regulator and Administrator of the Adventure Activities Regulations. As they said at the time, they will be investigating and considering all of the relevant work, health and safety issues surrounding this tragic event. The Health and Safety at Work Act 2015 covers work and workplaces in New Zealand, and WorkSafe is the primary regulator. Its role also encompasses public safety, where this is affected by work. The primary duty of care is held by the person conducting a business or undertaking, and they, usually an organisation, are required to manage the health and safety risks to people, including workers and public, arising from their activities. Tour operators, cruise ship companies, emergency responders and landowners fall under this. WorkSafe can prosecute for breaches of the Act, and penalties and criminal sanctions range from $50,000 to $3 million and up to 5 years in prison. I understand the WorkSafe investigation may take a year. The coronial processes are also likely to continue for some time. As a Cabinet, we know that it's possible there will be broader issues that won't be covered by these inquiries. Therefore, I have asked for advice from officials to look into whether there are any gaps that need to be addressed that fall outside of a potential coronial inquiry and the WorkSafe investigation. I expect advice on this in the new year. I can also confirm that today Cabinet approved a $5 million fund for the impact of recent events both in Whakatane and Westland. Particularly, this fund will focus on small businesses who may have been adversely affected. Obviously, we have criteria that's been established for past events that may have had similar effects on small businesses. Criteria will be established, drawing on experience of the past, and a delegated group of ministers will work through that criteria and administration of the fund over the summer period. We don't see this necessarily being the totality of the need in both of these areas, but we thought important to make sure that we were working to address immediate needs in Whakatane but also in Westland. In terms of the week ahead, Parliament's final sitting day will be on Wednesday, and I will be in the House for question time and the adjournment debate. On Tuesday, I will be in Mahia for the closing ceremony of Tuia 250, in attendance alongside Minister Davis. For now, though, I am happy to take any questions that you might have.
Minister, that $5 million, would White Island Tours or any of the other tour operators at White Island be eligible for some of those funds?
We haven't concluded the establishment of the criteria. What we are acknowledging is that there is likely to be wider impacts on an area, a place that has traditionally relied on tourism for employment and for economic activity. So I'm going to allow MB alongside ministers to work through some of the final criteria. But keeping in mind, obviously, there are a number of employees who have been affected and will be affected by what has happened on Whakaari White Island.
These tour operators arguably put people at risk in the first place by taking people out there.
Again, pointing out that we haven't concluded the establishment of the criteria or how this distribution of funds will work, except to acknowledge that there will be impacts for Whakatane in the same way we expect impacts in Westland. We've established a contingency which ministers will now work through the criteria around to support those communities.
In broader terms, under ACC, it's pretty hard to sue people in New Zealand, do you think this has made it too easy for some businesses to take too many risks and to not face consequences as a result?
No, not at all. Obviously, we have regulatory regimes that are around the management of risk, and particularly health and safety regulations. Those are entirely separate. I simply do not agree that ACC in any way has led to there being less focus on health and safety issues. Obviously here we need to work through a process, and WorkSafe will, around exactly what has happened in this case, and we need to await that work to be done.
Some of these operators and
advice that you're waiting on.
I'll come to you in a minute, Toby.
In terms of that advice that you're waiting for in the new year about any further investigations, do you envisage that it could go as far as a royal commission?
Not necessarily. In fact, keeping in mind, obviously what WorkSafe are able to do can be reasonably comprehensive, and also potential coronial inquests equally. Having looked back over some of the accidents previously in New Zealand, the 2008 canyon disaster, for instance, we had a parachuting incident in Fox Glacier. In both those cases, you saw the then Department of Labour, who held responsibility in that time, or Transport Accident Investigation Commission, investigate alongside coronial inquests. So we haven't always had separate inquiries again. What I want to ensure is that we answer all the questions that need to be answered, to try and do that with as little duplication as possible. But I'm waiting for a bit more advice on that.
Does a public inquiry seem like the best method to achieve that?
No, again, having looked at a number of accidents, significant events in recent years in New Zealand, they've often been investigated by, for instance, the Department of Labour, coronial inquests. They haven't always had then separate inquiries. What I want to make sure is that we answer all of the questions we need to answer, that we don't duplicate, and importantly, we don't get in the way of what WorkSafe needs to do as part of their job. So really, I am awaiting that advice. I want to make sure we're properly considered here.
Just to be clear, some of these operators, entities and individuals could be simultaneously investigated by WorkSafe while receiving government funds.
No, I have not said that. I've said we're yet to work through that. What we've decided as a Cabinet today is that there will be undeniably impacts on Whakatane and on Westland as a result of Westland recent weather events and the eruption in Whakatane. We need to make sure we're prepared to support particularly small businesses who will experience knock-on effects from that. We are prepared for that. Now ministers will go away and do the work around criteria.
Include some of the small businesses who will also be simultaneously investigated by WorkSafe.
Again, I have not confirmed that. What I'm saying is that we're prepared to provide the support required. There'll be a number of businesses that will be affected here. I'm going to let ministers now go away and work up, off the back of Kaikoura, for instance, the kind of support packages that we need.
But you're not ruling it out either?
Because we've made no decisions. So again, I'm going to leave that to ministers to do that work. Again, there are a number of employees and situations here that need to be thought about too, but again, no decisions have been made. We do need to move with some reasonable pace to get that in order and provide certainty, though, for those businesses more broadly affected.
Given that WorkSafe has the oversight when it comes to volcanic tourism,
yes,
is it likely, I mean, they're obviously running their own investigations, but surely there's going to have to be something much wider that actually takes in a look at what WorkSafe's role and responsibilities were, and actually properly looks at their sort of role during job. Would that be fair?
Yeah. And obviously that's not something that necessarily WorkSafe, obviously WorkSafe can't do that. But it wouldn't be out of the question, for instance, for a coronial inquest to potentially do that. So that's, you can understand why I just want to make sure that we get some proper considered advice, look at all of the issues that we rightly expect to be dealt with here, and make a considered judgment in the new year.
Timeframes. What would be the timeframe to actually get that set up, make that decision? And is a timeframe, which you mentioned before, of up to a year for this investigation, is that acceptable to you?
Yeah, so obviously WorkSafe already have announced that they'll be undertaking, as you would expect, a full investigation. They have a 12-month period by which, if they are going to, they would need to pursue any charges if they determine that that's necessary. So there's already a time limit set for WorkSafe. I've been advised that it is likely to take them a year to undertake this investigation. Look, as we've seen, inquiries can sometimes take more than that time, so it's not for me to judge whether or not that's an appropriate time frame. They need to do their job properly, and it needs to be properly considered. In terms of the other work, it's up to the coroner as to whether or not they undertake the nature of their investigatory work. That is a matter for them. And for us, as I said, I expect to get some more formal advice in the new year around any potential gaps that we might need to fill.
We wait until that WorkSafe investigation is completed until the public inquiry or whatever other kind of...
Not necessarily. If we do determine that there are gaps, then that may well be something that we could move on beforehand. I do want to get some advice, though, particularly from Crown Law, as to whether or not that jeopardises the work of WorkSafe and or how we might be able to manage if we do make a decision that that is required. So, again, there is already an investigation underway. That's critically important. That has started, has been announced by WorkSafe. Now it's just a question of what might we need to look at to make sure that we look at every angle of what has happened here.
$5 million be freed up to those small businesses who have been affected?
Well, obviously, we made a decision today to enable further work to be done before Cabinet resumes in the new year. So that $5 million is available now for ministers that we've delegated to go and work up some of that criteria over the summer period. So they're free to do that without Cabinet having to come back to it.
You can keep watching that on skynews.com on one of our extra channels. That's the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Look, talking in the main about the latest on the volcano situation, obviously still pledging for this full investigation. This is something that's going to be thorough, she promises, but they are going to take their time on it, so it could take up to a year. Obviously, a lot will focus on the warnings beforehand and what could have been known about the possible risks and whether that was communicated to people properly in the wake of, a tragedy that is still being felt in that country, and this one in particular.